talk us through kind of how this comment came about and also what's been the impact so far.
So this is the chairman of Fast Retailing, which is the owner of Uniqlo, and actually historically has steered away from commenting either way, whether or not Uniqlo does use cotton from Xinjiang. There was a BBC interview where essentially he confirmed that it's not using. And really in the past, the issue is that this has sometimes stoked this quite nationalist response from Chinese consumers who have decided to boycott other Western companies that have similarly sort of decided to change their supply chains. European and US businesses, of course, under quite a lot of pressure in recent years to steer away from using Xinjiang cotton because of the allegations over human rights abuses, all of which, of course, Beijing denies.
And so how real is the potential boycott, I guess, is the next question there?
Well, one way you can sort of look at this is by taking a look at social media to understand what kind of furore we're seeing on social media or not. And I will say so far it looks relatively mixed. But what you do see in some of the social media comments is this sort of deepening political awareness about what it means to be a Chinese consumer. So here, you know, this idea not using Xinjiang cotton is not necessarily a political stance at all. There are many Chinese companies that don't use Japanese raw materials. But I want to just point to that idea of the nationalist consumer here when it comes to Japan. Of course, she has stoked this sort of nationalism. Again, this idea, haven't bought anything made by Japanese companies for years. So these sort of debates trigger, you know, this broader concern about how we spend. Another comment here pointing to other brands like Nike, who have come out with similar comments saying they're not going to use Xinjiang cotton. Netizens also reacting and criticizing this move. But of course, this user at least saying that we still see brands like this in China. And just to return back that point on Uniqlo, I mean, the broader context of this interview is really in some ways sort of praising the strength of Uniqlo in China and touting potential expansion too.
Yeah, I mean, this issue of Xinjiang cotton was such a hot button topic a couple of years ago. But the fact that he's saying they don't use it, it's sort of maybe people had already assumed that's to date anyway. So is it really such a significant problem for the company, do you think?
Well, one thing that's really interesting about the sort of public remarks, I think, is that over the last few months, we have seen Beijing become much more reactive or proactive when it comes to these sort of issues. So, for example, in September, we saw Beijing say that they were going to launch this probe into the owner of Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein because they had made similar remarks. And so what we've seen is for the first time, really, Beijing trying to actually use these sort of regulatory probes as part of its toolkit when it's pushing back against this sort of criticism and pushing back against the tariffs and the threats that it's receiving from the US. So perhaps less of an issue about the Chinese consumer and the existential question of survival, but more of a question of whether Beijing increasingly uses this tool to target companies that are sort of commenting in this way and weighing in this way, and those sort of companies risk getting caught in the crosshairs here.